First off, I'd like to introduce our Dean of Science, Bob Lemieux. Bob is a total advocate for women in science and a big supporter of International Women's Day activities such as this. Bob is certainly a good voice for not just women as faculty and staff, but also with our science students here at Waterloo. Bob?
Thanks, Sharon, and good afternoon, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. I'm so happy to be here to celebrate and acknowledge the incredible contributions and inroads that women continue to make around the world. As you are aware, this year's theme of International Women's Day is Embrace Equity. And today we have an exceptional panel of science alumni who embody this theme. I guarantee this is going to be insightful and a very lively discussion. But first, I want to acknowledge that at the University of Waterloo, much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Holloman Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations, that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is centralized within our Indigenous Initiatives Office. So now I'd like to introduce our host for this event, Dr. Kirsten Mueller. Kirsten is the chair of the Department of Biology and the first woman to serve in that capacity in the Faculty of Science. She's an exceptional researcher who studies algae in lakes, rivers, and oceans, and the impact of climate change on these organisms and the ecosystems they live in. In 2019, Kirsten was selected as one of 2 Canadians to be part of Homeward Bound, a leadership initiative to advance the influence of women in decision-making in our communities, countries, and our planet. Kirsten is a tireless advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion in science, both here at UW and in academia beyond our institution. She's a role model to the next generation of scientists. And for today's discussion on embracing equity, I can't think of a better person to lead us all in this important conversation. To our other 4 panelists, Nicola, Charmaine, Michelle, and Olga, thank you for being with us today and for sharing your inspirational stories around embracing equity. Your career and personal success are an inspiration to all of us. You're a source of pride to our Faculty of Science and the University of Waterloo. And to our guests watching today, thank you for joining our International Women's Day event. I think we're on to something. Important conversations on what matters to women and really what has to matter to all of us. Only when we take time to listen, discuss, and act on those discussions can we take a significant and meaningful step towards equity. And so without further ado, I'll now pass the mic over to Kirsten to get this discussion underway. Enjoy today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction, Bob, and welcome to everyone. Happy International Women's Day. It is my absolute pleasure today to be moderating today's high tea and to once again be surrounded by such amazing women on the panel and of course in our virtual audience. So a special welcome and thank you to all of you who are attending today. So to begin with, I'd like to say a few words to introduce each of our panelists and ask them to turn on the cameras and say a couple words after I introduce them. So first, I would like to welcome Nicola Blue. Nicola graduated in 2002 and is currently the Vice President and General Manager of in-house creative agency with American Express. And she is leading the transformation and expansion of this agency. In the last 20 years of her career, Nicola has advocated for transformation, change management, and something that sounds fascinating to me, takes an empathy-based approach to business and team development. Thank you so much for joining us, Nicola, and please feel free to say a few words.
Yeah, thank you. It's really great to be here and be back with the UW community and with a wonderful group of individuals to share our, experiences and input. And I think, as you think about equity, how do we pay it forward to support others? So really excited to be here and join the conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Michelle Lee, who graduated in 2005 and is the founder of Clever Carbon. Clever Carbon educates people about sustainability and their carbon footprint to help accelerate change for our planet. Michelle is also the founder of Women in Climate, a nonprofit organization that creates a welcoming space for women to talk and learn about the impacts on our planet. Welcome, Michelle, and please feel free to say a few words.
Thank you so much for having me today. Really excited to be sharing International Women's Day with everyone here. And this is a pretty special day for me because not only is it a chance for us to, talk more about climate, but the role that women play and how equity can transform, our climate crisis and empower more women to take action. So really excited to get into the conversation.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's my pleasure to also welcome Charmaine Rodriguez. Charmaine completed her degree in 1996 and then went on to complete a master's in environmental science studies in the United States. She has an incredibly diverse background in pharmaceuticals, consumer products, and media, including with NBC Universal. And currently, Charmaine is the North American Regulatory Affairs Manager for Louis Vuitton, Moet, and Hennessy. In addition to her career, Charmaine contributes to numerous boards and is also pursuing a master's degree in legal and political studies. Welcome, Charmaine.
Thank you, Kirsten, and happy International Women's Day, everyone. I am really pumped for today. I am excited to be among a panel of, wonderful and women who have excelled in their careers, and I'm really happy for this day and this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Lastly, I'd like to welcome Olga Shmyadenko, who completed her degree here in 2005. Olga is the founder of WOW Women, an organization that spotlights extraordinary women and their stories around the globe. And more recently, WOW Women has been spotlighting Ukrainian refugees and sharing how these brave women have persevered through the invasion of their country. Welcome, Olga.
Thank you so much, and happy International Women's Day to the panelists and all the viewers. I'm excited to be here. I'm a science and business grad, and excited to share my path and hear about everyone else's. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. So again, thanks to all four of you for being here today. I'm quite excited about the conversation that we're going to have. So to begin, as you know, we asked all of our virtual attendees about how they embrace equity, which of course is this year's theme. And I want to give you a quote from a PhD candidate from within the faculty. This PhD candidate eloquently notes that she starts with herself when it comes to embracing equity. And she says, "I'm actively trying to unlearn my preconceived notions on gender and what it means to be a woman in science. I'm telling my imposter syndrome to sit down and allowing myself to acknowledge my own intelligence and successes rather than shying away from it." So my first question to you as the panel members is, what does embracing equity mean to you? And Charmaine, maybe I can start with you, please.
Sure. Thank you, Kirsten. Just to be really transparent, equity is probably a concept that I've really only discovered recently in terms of understanding the nuances between equity and equality. So I first had to kind of wrap my head around that and understanding that difference. And then, since I've learned that, embracing equity to me is really just making sure that everyone has a seat at the table, and just understanding that people come with different backgrounds, different barriers to being able to excel, and just being able to, understand that and give everyone that opportunity, and making sure that people, may have different needs within different contexts and really addressing those. So, really, it's really about not judging, and being able to kind of meet people where they are. So that's really how I approach equity in my day-to-day.
Thank you. Michelle, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I very similar to Charmaine, the nuance between equity and equality is a small nuance, but important. And I think that the work that we're doing with women in climate is embracing equity in a way where we can provide an environment for women to thrive and to feel joyful and to feel safe. And in doing so, have a platform where they can think about more solutions around the climate crisis, how to take action on a day-to-day from a personal stance and also in a professional manner. And this was important to me because when I transitioned from my traditional career to my climate career, it was a really difficult pathway. And, I want to provide an environment where women can easily thrive when it comes to climate action. And I think that, for me, that means helping people be successful from an equity standpoint.
Thank you. I think safety is one of those things that maybe Olga can talk about when you're maybe dealing with a community that is not experiencing safety and women that are not feeling safe in their own environment. And that must be a real challenge, Olga, when you're working with women who are in a situation such as that. And how does equity fit into that?
Well, I just wanted to add directly to the quote that you mentioned. I can completely relate to the scientist who is trying to unlearn all these, built-in kind of innate things that we have in our head as women. I interviewed over 300 women in about 50 countries, and I will say out of probably 90% of those women have said to me, that they are not worthy of a candidate to be profiled, to be interviewed, to be photographed. And, I had probably a handful of men who raised their hand to say that they should be the first wow man on my platform. So for me, the addressing equity means giving voices to women, to all kinds of women from all kinds of backgrounds, and letting them shine and tell their story without fearing for their safety, for retributions. And I have seen plenty of that in my experience.
Thank you. And Nicola, what does embracing equity mean to you?
I mean, a lot of the themes, obviously, they've been shared already, really resonate. And I think, as Charmaine was saying, it's been an interesting journey of really digesting the differences and understanding the terms in a deeper level. And like when I was thinking about it, two words kind of came to mind for me, this idea of understanding and enabling. So how do we understand the context of the individuals and the environment and the community? And then how do we enable? And that is at that sort of more individual level in terms of what does each person need to have access to success or be enabled to be successful. And it's kind of like, how do we show up on a day-to-day basis, all the little things, but then the big things in terms of how those come together. But those were, as I sort of broke it down, I was like, I got to understand and then I got to enable. And how do I do that? And how do I show up on a day-to-day basis to support that in the best way I can?
Yeah, Nicola, I think that raises us to the next quote that I have, which is really talking about how can we individually as a person address things in a day-to-day level within our workplaces. So I'll read this quote from one of our alumni registrants. And they note respecting others regardless of who they are or how different they are from myself. Listening to others and learning from their lived experiences, and then sharing with others my own experiences and insights. And I think for me there, it's the listening and the deep listening to other people's experiences and recognizing it's different. And that's something really important to do in our workplace. And so what are your thoughts on how you manage that within your workplace? Is listening a big component of it? How do you manage that? So I'll open the floor to whichever one of you would like to unmute and speak.
I'm happy to pick up
Sure.
the thread. It's a notion for me of like curiosity, and where listening plays a huge role in listening, not only to the words, but to the body language and to the environment. And really, how do we get that fuller sort of hearing aspect of things to understand where someone's coming from, where they're aspiring to. But I think it is, as the initial quote said, like unlearning or parking, preconceived notions, to be curious, to understand, and how do we allow ourselves to enrich the environment, one for the individual, but for the group, by hearing the different experiences and the questions, and just allowing ourselves to keep challenging, to learn and grow, because our environment keeps changing. And so we as well have to keep sort of evolving our thinking and just sort of seeking new inspiration to keep going.
And Nicola, do you have an example of how you've done this in your workplace?
So part of, in my role is a lot of, mentoring and coaching. And so part of it is like seeking to understand and like sort of tell me more, help me understand, and usually actually using quite open questions. So I'm very mindful about how I ask questions and to make sure they aren't closed yes, no questions. So I try to, from a coaching mindset, really try to open a lot of open questions and probe and try to work to create a very open, safe space where all ideas are good. And as a leader, also, being declarative in terms of it is a safe space. We do want to be curious. We do want to learn. And the idea of innovation evolution is part of who we are. And so it is trying to role model that behavior and, talking across the team with individuals, whether direct reports or not, but sort of creating that web of connection to make sure voices are heard. And acknowledging what we're hearing. So try to sort of do the feedback loop as best we can, but continuing to seek and hear from everybody.
So it sounds like to me it's a lot of community building, and community building really starts with those one-on-one relationships, right? Mm-hmm. And Michelle, I'm sure you have many conversations with many people about climate and many different points of view, and some probably that don't align with you. So how in your conversations with people do you show, do you embrace equity and model that?
That's a really interesting point, Kirsten, because I think people have very different opinions on climate. Some people think carbon literacy is really important. Some people don't. Some people think individual action is really important. And some people think that it comes from the top down. And I think one of the most important sort of values I try to hold is everyone is allowed to have their own opinion. And you don't have to think the same way that I do when it comes to climate issues, climate solutions, or anything else. And I think that listening component is really important. And, no one in climate kind of knows everything today. It's a new subject. It's so multifaceted, it's complex, it's, our everyday habits, it's science, it's legislation, it's society. And being open, listening, and giving people the opportunity to voice what they think and share their thoughts and opinions, I think is really important.
That's fantastic. And Charmaine, what about you in your workplace? And how do you show or demonstrate embracing equity and examples of that?
Yeah, so I mean, it really starts with just having empathy. I feel like I agree with both Michelle and Nicola too about, really kind of unlearning, and kind of shutting off the biases and just kind of looking internally and kind of figuring out, what are my preconceptions, or, do I have any kind of ideas about how this should be, and kind of remove that, because, I'm interacting with a lot of people from different countries, just different backgrounds, and just having empathy towards them, just to understand what their views are, as Michelle says, and knowing that they are probably not similar to mine, but just having that empathy and understanding their background and their, the reason why they're having this particular opinion about, this thing that I think should be fact, so it's really unlearning and empathy.
Yeah, I think that's great. So we've heard like listening and empathy and unlearning. And I think there's also probably an element of being kind to ourselves, because we can be really hard on ourselves as women. And I think, back to that first quote about imposter phenomenon, I think all those things play a role in how we interact with people and build communities. And Olga, what do you think? Are there elements in there that apply to what you do, or are there other elements that you would like to add?
Sure. I agree with everything that's been said. And for me, my role is to really just be a spotlight for women that I've featured I kind of shut down my own preconceived ideas, because it's such a multi-country project that I have. So, you know, that there's different religious backgrounds, different educational backgrounds of women that I interact with, and just hearing their point of view and shutting down my own you know, idea or my own upbringing bubble, which shall I say, has been really helpful. And I think people feel that when you kind of just let them be themselves, and they then pour more of themselves out, and they're more honest with you. So to me, that's what really has worked for my project.
Mm-hmm. No, that completely makes sense. And it goes back to that deep listening and allowing people to be authentic and to show who they are and value what they're saying. So, Nicola, I know you touched on a little bit about leadership and how that's really important in terms of being a role model. And I know for myself that, you know, breaking ground and being the first woman chair, or being a role model, and how representation is so important, whether it's in the classroom, in the boardroom, or whatever place that we work on. It really sets the stage for those who are going to be coming behind us. And so a professor in the Faculty of Science noted something similar and said, in order to brace equity, they take opportunities as they arise to leave the institution a better place for my junior female colleagues and trainees. So when we think about this, and we think about the steps that we're taking forward, how can we help the next generation? How can we use mentoring to continue to encourage those that are coming behind us to continue to push forward?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And that's where, you know, doing a lot of mentoring internally and, you know, the imposter syndrome comment obviously, you know, resonates with even myself. I look past upon my own career kind of growing and like, oh, I wish I'd, you know, been more bold when I was more junior in my career. But I think it is taking that time to listen and encourage and help people sometimes like unpack things a little bit. And there's sometimes, you know, that benefit of arm's length of just how do we help people have the courage to understand that they can make those leaps. And I think it's also connecting people, like within our company, a lot of the network and the community, as you said, is to help people see other people and to gain, I think, confidence and courage from seeing those. There's, you know, it's a broader group. And since I've been at Amex, I've seen like the growth of women leadership. And it's for the individual, you know, thinking the other way, like seeing what my sort of leaders are setting the tone for me. That's been really exciting as I've grown here to see more and more of that. And I hope I can play a similar role for others as sort of what I've benefited from, and sort of making sure I'm taking a moment consciously to do that for others and set a scene. But I think it is making the time to listen. And sometimes we get really busy with work and like, you know, charging through things, but there's that moment to just like stop and talk and like be able to really dig into where some of the questions are coming from and trying to, you know, more of the philosophical, where am I going with things, and just making time for that, I think is important to create the space to get into it a little bit deeper and there to give people, you know, confidence and courage to continue forward.
Thank you. And for the rest of the panel, what about mentorship for you? Have you had mentors? Are you mentoring people? How do you view as maybe pay it forward's not a good term to use, but how do we continue to keep this momentum and encourage those who come behind us and really lift that ladder up for them to come up as well? Any thoughts? Charmaine?
Yeah, so I can go. I feel like, you know, in my career, I've been a recipient of equity. And so I feel like, you know, because I've been on the other end, I feel like it behooves me just to be able to give back, as you mentioned. And, you know, a lot of times, because I'm in the industry that I'm in, I will have younger women reach out to me. How can I get in the beauty industry, you know? And I, you know, despite, you know, having, you know, everyone's busy, so I can't really use that as an excuse. So I just take every opportunity to share with those women who reach out to me how they can get in, you know, what steps they need to take. Because I feel like once, you know, now, not that I've arrived or anything, but now that I've I am in that industry, I feel like, the door does, I can't close the door behind me because there's room for everyone. There's room for all women, to excel and grow. So I feel like just sharing what I've learned so far. And, I was speaking to a friend recently about, being able to pass the baton on. And she said what she does is, sometimes she's given an opportunity to travel, right? And to go overseas in her job. But what she does is if there's a younger person who could be the recipient of that, where it will add more value to their lives, she will actually give up a trip to someone else. And I thought that was fantastic. So that's something that I will probably choose to do in my career, see who's around me, who could benefit, it's not just taking it all for yourself and just being able to share that with other women. So I think that's really, really important to pass that on. And, I have a son, so you want to make sure I model equitable behavior to him so he can actually see that and practice that as he is growing up. So I think it's extremely important.
That's great, Charmaine. And Melanie has written in the chat to us here, opportunities to be seen are an essential part of sponsorship. Sponsors are often in a position to create spaces for individuals who may be overlooked because they don't fit the frame of the usual suspects. And I think that's a big part of what you're talking about, Charmaine, is being able to lift those people up and provide opportunities. Like, that's a great idea. Give someone an opportunity to travel overseas and be seen by others in the organization. Olga, I saw you just unmuted there, so I'm gonna call you.
Sure. I mean, to me, a specific example comes to mind from the women that I've spoken with, and why I do what I do partly started because I was kind of seeking, I should say, older mentors who have gone through, a journey that I can learn from. But to my previous example with one of the women who did raise her hand and say, I am actually a wild woman, watch me, she's a physicist at Columbia University, and she works with dark matter, and she has a massive lab in Italy and in New York she runs a lab. And she said, yeah, well, this is me. I'm a wild woman. She was in high heels in her lab running the whole show and has postdocs. And to me, just taking that confidence, taking it and showing it to other women that I've spoken with who may have had, fewer kind of confidence boosts in their life. That's what I'm trying to do with Wild Woman, and to show her off as an example, and I've learned from her as well so much. So I create a community where women can share and ask questions, ask each other questions, help each other, and learn from one another. So that's kind of how I approach it.
That's great. And I think remembering that we can have mentors all around us, it doesn't need to be a hierarchy either. We can learn from people that surround us, whether they be students. I'm thinking about myself here. It could be an undergraduate student who inspires me, or a graduate student, or staff or faculty. They're all around us, and we have lots to learn from people. And Michelle, what about you?
Yeah, when I have different opportunities to be a mentor. At Clever Carbon, we have lots of volunteers. And that's like a one-to-one type of relationship. And, it's in terms of the impact and the scale, it takes time to develop that relationship and to help coach individuals. What I really have enjoyed doing with the platform that we have at Women in Climate is creating opportunities for women to kind of, go get that opportunity. So, for example, at Women in Climate, we have a program called Catalyze, where we have 2 speaking opportunities each month for our members who are working on climate. And we like to select people who don't necessarily have a lot of opportunities before to speak, and give them that opportunity, give them that face time. They can share on LinkedIn and, start drumming up some, awareness for the work that they do. And I don't necessarily directly mentor them, but, we give them guidance on, how to present, how to be succinct, how to be impactful in sharing their work. And even yesterday, we had a program called Bold, and we invited women to share hot takes. So they were invited to record a 30-second video and, another platform for them to really, get comfortable with presenting and being in the public eye and giving them those opportunities that maybe they wouldn't have had before.
Thank you. And I want to just go to a comment here in the chat as well, where Simone notes that in Alan Alda's Clear and Vivid podcast, he has a session where he interviews Melinda Gates, and she talks about mentorship and sponsorship and why it's so important. And I think we've heard a lot here about how people around us we can mentor, and people that come into our organizations and how we mentor them. And I'll go to a quote from a UW staff member who noted that they embrace equity by being involved in their local communities, so expanding out from their workplace. And then they talk about championing equity within their scientific field right across Canada. So when we think about, we've talked about our own communities and the people around us and the communities that we've created in our workplaces, but how do we step out of that? How do we step out into that broader community and bring the issues of equity to the forefront? So how do we do that? Any thoughts on that?
I think
Nicola?
part of it is things like today, like talking about it. I think, as both Charmaine and I said, is always like this notion of these sort of understanding these words a bit differently has been a journey, and a good one. But I think it's like a lot of things. It's like, how do we talk about it? How do we take stigma away? How do we make it more an easier conversation, a more understood conversation? I think that can show up many ways, whether it's like with friends or in, if you're in a volunteer organization, but how do we just show up and try to bring the topic top of mind and really, have the discussion? Because I think by talking about things, we create noise, right? And hopefully you bring others along and create more noise around it. So I think that's one way of just like consciously making an effort to discuss the topic on a regular basis.
Yeah,
I agree.
Completely aligned with Nicola. I think just having this conversation today, as she said, and being able to distinguish the differences, I think for a lot of people, this will be an educational opportunity. And, just not being afraid to have courageous discussions with your friends and, just pretty much people that you meet with every day. I feel what's really important is to take away the personal aspect from it. So I think sometimes when we talk about inequities, people could take it personally. And I think that's, feel as if they're probably being attacked or, I did something wrong. But I think it's important for people to realize that it's really not about you, quote unquote, but it's about making a difference as a whole, right? And I think even showing the results of how equitable behavior can impact communities as a whole, I think when we highlight those, I think people can understand how important it is to embrace equity. So I think, focusing on, having conversations, focusing on results and, highlighting those results can help people to kind of take it on and run with it, because it's pretty much a win-win situation for everyone. I receive an opportunity. It makes for a better person, a better community. It just kind of radiates outwards. So it's truly a win-win situation.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. I think these conversations, whether they're happening here with us right now or out in the community or even at the dinner table with our own families, can really kind of shape the conversation going forward. Michelle, you've created, a fairly large community with your company. Can you comment on this as well?
Yeah, part of the reason why I created Women in Climate is to activate women professionals. I think they hold a lot of power, a lot more power than they think within companies. And when they have climate on their mind, they can ask for what they want, whether it's a plant-based lunch, whether it's no plastic in the kitchen. And, like Nicola and Charmaine said, it's not only, it's raising the issue and talking about the issues, but then the next step is asking for what you need and what you want to see. And from a climate perspective, I want to make sure women are empowered and feel that they can go to HR, they can go to workplace services or to their C-suite to ask for what they want from a climate perspective. So to me, empowering women professionals is really an important part.
That's great. And Olga, you've got a community of women, WOW women around the world. And have you thought about going beyond that and into broader communities? I'm sure you share about what WOW Woman is to many different people.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add, I agree with everything that's been said. And for me, what really has worked has been stepping outside the comfort zone and my own, and then encouraging others to do the same, because that's how community, in my opinion, builds. We have all kinds of ideas about one another, but until we reach out and ask questions, we'll kind of never expand our own bubble and our own point of view. So that's what's worked for me really well. And I'm trying to, my platform is pretty global, so I feel like I'm already expanded and connected women from Egypt to Greenland to South Africa. And that's what drives me. I love seeing that and them working together. And but yeah, outside the comfort zone, that's what I would say, to expand the community.
That's great. And I think, kind of continuing on this topic, we've talked about conversations. What else do you think we can do to help the next generation achieve equity and continue striving for that? Is it just conversations? Is it, or is there something else that we could do that even our virtual audience could do?
For me, I would say in the past year, I've learned a lot about action and taking action and learning from those who are taking action. I'm Ukrainian, so I've felt in the last year, I've seen my country take action. People talk, but when it really comes down to survival and kind of yelling about what you need sometimes works as well, and acting on it and making yourself feel heard. I'm a big advocate for that. So I think speaking works, but also action is also very important.
And I think you touched on it a few minutes ago, being uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable can make you do brave things, and that can really catalyze change as well.
Yes.
Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Just even community service. I feel like, since the pandemic and, everything that has happened, I've had the opportunities to join a number of organizations in my own community in Englewood. So I became a member of the Women's Club and also another group, called the Mocha Moms. And it's just a network of supporting women. With the Women's Club, there are scholarship programs for high school women here in Englewood. With our Mocha Moms organizations, we do a lot of fundraising and community outreach, where we kind of model equitable behavior to our children. So it's, doing a couple months ago, we painted a women's shelter. And so, just being able to model this equitable behavior and actually putting it to life, right? We're giving back, we're making sure other women have opportunities. So we're directly impacting people. So I would say just, look around in your community and see what organizations are available and join them. They're free, right? So I would recommend that a lot.
You raise a really good point, Charmaine, and one of the things that I certainly talked about with a lot of the women that I was on the ship with Homeward Bound was becoming involved in boards and becoming involved in those communities and boards that might be near and dear to your heart. Maybe it's on Alzheimer's, maybe it's the Humane Society. And I know, Charmaine, you're on a couple boards. But what about the rest of you? Do you see how you can integrate embracing equity and getting involved in community and getting the word out more through those? Or maybe, Charmaine, you might want to talk a little bit more about even how you get on boards.
Yeah, so I'm on one of the boards. It's the Flat Rock Brook Nature Center here. I have a background in environmental studies. So there was, someone reached out to me. I was a little bit hesitant about it because, it's a lot of work being on a board, but, it's really about wanting to make a change. We have a really beautiful nature center in our community that's not being utilized by all of the community, right? So, and that has to do with the location of it. So one of my roles on the board is to get everyone to participate and enjoy this beautiful nature preserve. So I'm on the equity committee and the anniversary planning committee for that nature center. So it's about figuring out ways in which we can reach out to folks and, kind of even share with them that this nature exists, nature preserve exists, and just showing them how beautiful nature is, as Michelle can probably talk about that forever, and how important the environment is to us, right? And for our health and overall well-being. So just even seeing what the needs are within my community here, and knowing there is an opportunity to de-stress and go for a nature walk or a hike, and just kind of improve your overall health and wellness. So I feel that's what some of the inequities are in my community. So I feel like being on the board has helped to kind of broaden the scope of the nature center and being able to share that aspect of my community with other folks here.
And Charmaine, I think you raise a really interesting point here, that there's a real connection between environmental issues and equity. And Michelle, you've touched on that as well. Maybe you can expand on that.
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I think one of the quotes that we had yesterday in our programming was, 85% of the emissions is produced by a very small amount of people on our planet. And so equity is really at the center of our climate crisis in general. And I don't think that there is a silver bullet, but I do think that education is important. I think it's important that we all are able to make informed decisions. And that's where a little bit around the work with Clever Carbon comes in, is when we all have information that we need to make the decisions, we can make a better decision. And I don't want to assume that, if someone knew that beef, serving of beef is 7,700 grams of CO2, serving of chicken is 1,300, and a vegetarian meal 600, I don't want to assume that everyone's going to go vegetarian. But I do think that once people understand the data and they learn more, they will make better decisions for themselves, whatever that might be. And so having access and having opportunities to learn, I think, is really, really key.
Thank you. So I think I'll move now. We've got a couple questions that have come in. And the first is, equity seems to be a bit of a buzzword to some awoke movement. We know it's not. What are some easy ways to convey the importance of equity to those already at the top? Any thoughts on that? Olga.
I would say protest, go to the streets, reject the status quo. Does anyone want to back me up on this?
I would say it goes back to the conversations again, because I think the more we talk about it and the more we share, and the more we have a common language to talk about it, helps. What do you think, Nicola?
I think I think it's continuing to talk about it. I think it's giving context around it. So to help like lay out, like don't talk generally, right? Like get specific about certain things in terms of where it is happening or not happening and the impacts of that. And so I think in terms of enlisting others or educating others, part of that journey is to help people see it and see the, the benefits. But it's getting past, jargon or buzzwords and make it a more tangible topic. So I think it is, as leaders, for whether it's people up, sideways, below, whatever it is, but to create the context so that they can like wrap their heads around it and get more tangible in terms of what it means and why.
That's great. Another question that we have here is my STEM sisters from Waterloo are so dear to me after so many years, is the comment. And then a person goes on to note that I know my career has had barriers that I've had to overcome or work around while being a woman in a male-dominated environment. Can you talk about how your personal journey has been impacted by equity challenges? I know earlier we talked about mentorship and how that's helped us and how we can help others. But any of you would like to comment on your experiences in your career?
I'm happy to comment. Prior to starting my climate career, I was in tech sales, and my job involved walking into often a room of men and being the technical expert, having to explain things. And you can imagine what that might be like being in a room full of white men. I'm an Asian woman and trying to earn everyone's trust. And I do think that I have had to work a little bit harder. I've had to, spend more time really getting to know the technology, making sure that I'm able to answer all the questions and making sure that, I'm continue to being, chosen for some of these opportunities despite the circumstance. And I do think that we do have to put in a bit of the hard work. And in order to have true equity, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to happen overnight, but we have to work towards it. And if that's what we want, if we want to walk into a room and be able to command attention and, be trustworthy and be that, expert in the room, we have to put in the work. And maybe that goes to, we have to talk about it, but then there has to be some action afterwards. Is it going to the streets and protesting? Is it putting in extra time to make sure, you're rock solid? I think it's different for different people, but there needs to be that action. And I definitely have experienced that in my career.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michelle. I see a couple comments here, one that's in our chat and one that's in the other, and they're talking about the next generation that's coming after us. And first, the first one says, I think Gen Zs are teaching us about equity. And I should say I'm speaking for myself about generation. I'm a Gen Xer, so I don't know all your ages, but Gen Xers have rejected a lot of values inherent with economic growth, have traded them in for other values, prioritizing things like social justice, fair trade, gender empowerment. And they often seek opportunities that are meaningful and learn globally from being well-traveled. And then another one goes on to note, it's the younger generation. They're opening their eyes, opening the person's eyes to their unbiases and accepting points of view, which is, of course, different from some of our upbringings. And she goes on to note a common thing that her daughter does is to see a person expressing their unique identity, purple hair, and says respect, nodding her head. And that makes her smile. And so I wonder a little bit, are those generations, at least that are coming after me, I've got a Gen Alpha in my house too. Are they kind of forging the way ahead of us? We talked a little bit earlier about how we can mentor, but I wonder if there are opportunities for them to be kind of guiding us through this as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a 10-year-old, and I was just listening to a conversation that he was having with his other 10-year-old. Well, he was 9-year-old at the time. And this 9-year-old girl, she was giving, a bunch of them the scenario about about judging a book by its cover, right? And so she was talking about her grandma and how her grandma was judging this guy by the way how he was dressed. And she was like, I don't know why my grandma judges a book by its cover, you know? And she goes, why can't just, you know, people should just be who they are. And I was like, oh my goodness, how profound, because, you know, like she is able to acknowledge all the biases that exist. And I feel like, I don't know where she got this from, but I feel like, you know, this generation is definitely probably even paving the way for us, because I feel, you know, when I look at different people, I think about her comment and being able to remove my personal biases from the situation. So I think this generation is definitely, I don't know whether it's taught in school, but I feel that some of them are actually moving in the right direction when it comes to equity.
That's great.
Yeah,
Well,
what resonated for me was this, again, this idea of curiosity, and just we can learn from everywhere and everyone, and our environment keeps changing. And how do we, like, you know, it's not about hierarchy, it's about just openness. And how do we really learn from everywhere and ask the questions? And I think it is continuing just to push, you know, push biases, push preconceived notions, and keep learning from everyone around us. And the different generations will help us see things differently. So I think it is just that openness and general curiosity to keep learning and keep sort of evolving where we're going and how we're going, I guess.
mm-hmm. And I think, you know, those generations that are younger than us, and certainly the Gen Alphas and the 10-year-olds are probably a lot more curious than we are right now. Charmaine, there was a question in the chat for you. And it says, Charmaine, did you say that the beautiful nature space in your community is not as accessible to many? Is there a reason for that? If needed, is there a way to facilitate getting folks out to the location?
Yeah, so this particular nature center is located in the more exclusive part of our community. There is no public transportation that really goes there. And so those folks who are on the other side really don't have access unless they have a car. And a lot of people just thought that because it was in this neighborhood that they couldn't go there. They just felt that, oh, it wasn't for me. So my job, or a part of my committee, was to raise the awareness and ensuring that people knew that this beautiful preserve, they can have access to it too, you know. So I mean, I even spoke to people who were born in this community and they didn't know that they could actually go there and enjoy the space. So yeah, it was pretty amazing, just to interesting and mind-blowing just to see how, you know, folks thought about the nature center. It was really interesting. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. And Olga, we're going over to a response to your comment here. And this is from Moira Glera. Protest that resonates. I was a kid during the time of the bra burners and never thought I needed to make my voice heard in that way. But here we are in 2023, still having to work hard to get our voices heard. Maybe I should have protested more.
Well, I personally, I'm just speaking to the plight right now and what I'm learning from my own people. You know, I'm from Ukraine, immigrated to Canada, and just the sort of energy I feel around our cause and what actually works on kind of the bigger scale when people do get together and decide enough is enough. It's amazing. And, you know, to your question was more how to influence higher ups. And sometimes it's the only way that could work. But of course, conversation and diplomacy also does too.
Right. And there was also an earlier question, Olga, where does someone get a t-shirt like yours?
Oh my goodness. I have been actually really in love with a site called Saint Javelin. It's a Canadian based site. The guy's in Toronto. He's a journalist who is Polish, Ukrainian background. He lives in Toronto, and he started a site called saintjavelin.com. That kind of a play on words, because the javelins was something Ukrainians were asking for from Americans. And anyway, you can find the merch there, mugs, whatever you need to support, and all the proceeds go toward the Ukrainian support.
That's great. Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question here, and this has come in the Q&A. Thank you all for sharing your insights. And what advice would you give for someone wanting to change their career path after a decade? I'm a biotech CA grade and have spent over 10 years in banking and capital markets, but would love to transition to a career in science. And I know some of you have gone from science into more of those different businesses, and some of you have gone into from a more business into, more environmental issues. So thoughts on that?
I can respond.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Nicola, go ahead.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think part of it is really like looking at yourself and your skills and like taking some of the labels off them in terms of, what's the robust set of skills you've built in your, 10 plus years, and helping people see how those can transfer. Because I think regardless of where you are, you learn all these things, but it's like analytics, socializing, development. There's all these things we learn in our career, and they're very applicable in different areas. And I think sometimes the challenge is just helping the audience see the power of your experiences and just help them connect the dots from one environment to the other. But I think sometimes it's just taking the time to pull back maybe the packaging, if you will, or the labeling, and get to the core of what your true skills are and help people see those connections and help them really see you in that role. And sometimes it's a little bit taking a little extra work to know where they're trying to get to, but really make it, easy for them to visualize you with you there. And I also think it's about owning your gaps, right? If you got gaps, just call it, right? But have a plan. And I think often when I'm looking at people doing career changes is that passion for change that is also something quite compelling. So I wouldn't be, worried about gaps so much, is like have the core skills and sell those and celebrate those, but then be really mindful of where the gaps are and have a plan. So that'd be some like basic advice, I would think.
That's great. Thank you, Nicola. And Olga, you want to add on to that?
As someone who's done both hat wearing, where I was in HIV vaccine research for 10 years in New York, and then had to see myself in a completely different role as a photojournalist, I would say what I wish someone told me earlier when I switched would be to reach out to someone who's done it before. And we're so connected now, we can find someone on social media and ask them for advice and really connect with them, and someone who you aspire to be or someone you respect, and just ask, and that will expand kind of your view of, and maybe like let them see yourself in that role, and kind of, I think that would be my advice.
That's great. Thank you so much. So we have 1 minute left in our time. I don't know where this last hour has gone. So any last words from each of you at all? Feel free to unmute. No. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending today. And I really hope that our conversation on embracing equity continues within our communities, whether those be our communities around the dinner table, within our workplaces, or in our broader communities and around the world. Thank you so much to all the panelists, Charmaine, Michelle, Olga, and Nicole. It has been such a pleasure to be here with you today and to hear your inspiring words and your thoughts on embracing equity. And I really hope you will all keep in touch. And I also want to thank the incredible staff in the Faculty of Science, Patricia and Sharon, for making this high tea a success. And again, thank you to the audience for all your questions and comments. I know we didn't get to them all, but I want to thank you all for being here today. So thank you very much, everyone. Take care.